The topic of rain. Baruch Hashem, it rained the last couple of days, a little bit. This may be come as a surprise to many people, but there is a Beracha to be said for rain in Eretz Yisrael. Essentially, every time it rains. Unless it rains, it's just a few drops and it barely makes the rooftops or the footpath wet. There's a Beracha to be said, and most people don't know this. And the reason most people don't know this has everything to do with the fact that we were in Galut for so long. And the importance of rain in European countries, shall we say, is altogether different from its importance and the centrality of rain here in Eretz Yisrael. And this is something that we need to fully understand. I will explain as we go on what the Beracha is for rain. And on that also, there's also more than one opinion. First of all, let us understand why is Eretz Yisrael different from most other countries when it comes to rain. And this is truly Torah Eretz Yisrael. This is the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, because this is something which you really cannot understand if you live in a country where it rains all the time. If it rains winter and summer, it rains every 3-4 days, every 2 weeks. This whole concept doesn't make any sense. But in Eretz Yisrael it makes a tremendous amount of sense, because it does not rain all the time. It only rains, practically speaking, about 4 months of the year, maybe 5 at the most, not really. Mostly 4 months of the year, and even then it's iffy. So we're in an area where the rainfall is borderline. We're on the border between areas which are where more rain is received, where more rain falls, and in countries right next door, areas right next door, parts of Eretz Yisrael also receive very little rain. And we talk about this all the time. Every year we talk about this in the Haftarah, which is the first source in these sheets that you have. In the Haftarah, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Sukkot, from Sefer Zechariah. What does it say? Wahaya Kol Hanothar Mikol HaGoyim Habaim Al Yerushalayim. It's talking about the nations coming to Yerushalayim on Sukkot. Wa'alu mideh shana v'shana, they shall come to Yerushalayim every year, lishtahavoth lamelech Adonai Sabaoth, v'lahog et Hag HaSukkot. They shall come to celebrate the Hag, the festival of Sukkot. Wahaya asher lo ya'ale me'eth mishpachot ha'aretz al Yerushalayim. This is in the future time, those who shall not come to Yerushalayim to worship Hashem, acknowledge Hashem. Lishtahavoth lamelech Adonai Sabaoth. If they will not come to Yerushalayim to bow before Hashem, v'lo alehem yeh geshem. It will not rain in their country. Ve'im mishpachat Mitzrayim lo ta'ale v'lo va'a v'lo alehem. Tiyeh hamagefa asher yigof Adonai et hagoyim asher lo ya'alu lahog et Hag HaSukkot. So those nations that will not come will not receive rain. And then it mentions Mitzrayim specifically. Why does it mention Mitzrayim? We'll go on, we'll see in a moment. So Rashi says on these Pesukim, I read, he says, Geshamim mamash lasmiach perot arsam. The reason for the rain is, first of all, of course, to cause things to grow. And why would Hashem decree that they should not receive rain? Lefi shem miswat ahar ala geshamim him. The miswat that we perform during Sukkot have to do with the rain in general. Arbat haminim, nisu hamayim in the Mikdash, and hibut arava on the 7th day of Sukkot. This all has to do with rain. Arbat haminim shebalulav v'nisu chamayim l'rasot al hamayim al she'ahar zaman gishmei shana hu. Where is this true? This is only true in Eretz Yisrael, that the time for rain begins at Sukkot. That's when it begins. Often it rains during Sukkot a little bit. That's when the rainy season begins. In other countries, most countries, it rains either all year or at least two or three rainy seasons throughout the year. It's only in this part of the world, very, very specific part of the world, that the rain is limited to 4 months at a very specific time of the year. Those who doubt and who do not come to Yerushalayim, they will not have rain. This I learned in the Tosefta Masechet Sukkah, says Rashi. And if the Egyptians, the people who live in Egypt, will not come to Yerushalayim, they don't need rain. Why don't they need rain? They have the Nile River. Egypt, if you look on a satellite image of Egypt, is all sand. It's just desert, it's just sand. And down the middle you have this green snake, this green line, wiggly line like a snake going down from the Mediterranean in the north, from the delta, and down through down to Sudan. That is the Nile River, and on both sides of the Nile River there's a certain area, two bands that are irrigated by the Nile, and they're green and they're very fertile because the water of the Nile carries silt and other things, and it's extremely fertile. That's why Egypt became a tremendous empire, because in order to be an empire you have to be able to produce a lot of food to support the population, to support your army, etc. Without lots of grain, there's no empire. So the Egyptians, the people in Egypt, never needed rain. They live off the Nile River. They in fact receive very little rain. In other words, they who don't live off the rain, they need the Nile River. The Nile River will fail them. It will not rise and flood the areas next to the river, and they will also suffer as a result, as if they did not get rain. V'chein tirgem Yonatan. This is what Yonatan writes: Lo alehem yisak nilus. The Nile will not rise that year. In other words, sometimes if the Nile fails and doesn't rise as it does regularly at a certain time, then they'll be in trouble. And that's what it says in Sefer Yehezkel. The Sefer Yehezkel Perek Kafteth. Daber u'amarta ka amar Adonai Elohim hineni alecha Paro melech Mitzrayim. Hashem speaks to the king of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, Hatanim Hagadol, like the great crocodile, Haroves b'thoch Ye'orah, who lives in his rivers. Asher amar li Ye'ori wa ani asithini. I have the river, and I'm a self-made great man. I don't need anybody. I have the river. The river is my greatness. Like the crocodile who lives he hides in the water, and he lives in the water, and he doesn't need anybody. Rashi explains, Hatanin Hagadol, the great alligator, crocodile. Lefi shekol gedulatha shel Mitzrayim, the greatness, the splendor, the wealth of Mitzrayim, v'chol sova sheba, and all its great plenty, al yedei Ye'orei Nilusu. It's all because of the Nile. And also, of course, when you have a great river like the Nile, already in ancient times, thousands of years ago, they dug channels, irrigation channels, from the Nile to the sides, as far as they could take it, which is actually quite a long way, a kilometer, 2, 3. And these irrigation channels, the Nile would rise, and it floods these channels, and all that area becomes automatically irrigated. That's why the Navi in Yehezkel refers to the king of the Egyptians as the great crocodile, and the people of Mitzrayim as the fish, because they live off the river. The river is their greatness. Li Ye'ori, I have my river. Eni tzarich le'elyonim, I don't need God. I don't need anybody. Ki yesh li Ye'ori, maspik or mesapek kol tzarachai, that provides all my needs. Wani asithini bigvurathi v'chochmati igdalti gedulati u'memshati. I made myself great. The Radak, Rabbi David Kimhi, also explains this. He says, Li Ye'ori hamashke othi wa'arsi, that river which irrigates me and my kingdom. V'hasova animsaba b'rov hashanim, most years. When any sarich lematar, I don't need rain. V'lo lelech lemedinot achirot ba'avur tuvah, I don't need to go and buy grain from other people. People come to me, like we saw Yosef, the brothers, they had to go to Mitzrayim when there was famine, Ra'av in Eretz Canaan. Here, they went there because there they always have grain. Almost always. Wa'ani asithini, ani asithi v'fikanti li hayeor lahashkot et arsi. This is how the pharaohs used to speak, that we're responsible for this whole system. O perusho asithini asithi v'thikanti othi b'chokhmathi uv'thfunati ad shena'aseti melech gadol. I made myself into this great emperor. V'chamo asher asat Moshe v'Aaron sheperusho higdilam. I made myself great. Okay, so what do we learn from these pesukim, both in Zechariah and in Yehezkel, and from Rashi and the Radak? That Eretz Yisrael is very different from a country like Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim has this tremendous river, which is pretty much constant, very rarely fails. That's why the ancient Egyptians already understood a lot about astronomy. They knew when it would rise. They knew how to predict exactly, and they kept this knowledge to themselves, the priests and the king. So the common people thought that these people are really something. They figured they really, they basically make it happen. And this water, and it's also very fertile water, allowed Egypt to become a tremendous empire. There's another country not far from here that had the same system going for it, and that was Ashur and then Bavel, right? Babylon. They have two rivers, the Perath and the Hidekel, the Euphrates and the Tigris. Also two great rivers that are constant. Very little rain in those countries, in those areas, but there's always the river. You can build channels, irrigation channels, and you can produce a tremendous amount of grain. Eretz Yisrael is totally different. We don't have any great rivers. We have rain, or we don't. And that's the whole story. People who have this constant, tremendous river irrigating their country, they think, whether they say it or not, they think like Paro, like the king of Mitzrayim. Ani asithini. I'm my own man. I'm great because I am, and I'm very clever, and I'm very wonderful, and I'm in charge, and I don't have to be worried, I don't have to be concerned about anything at all. But in Eretz Yisrael, we have to be constantly thinking about, is it going to rain? How much is it going to rain? Is it going to rain in different parts of the country? The same, less, more? And it's a very close thing, whether it's a good year or not such a good year. In other words, we cannot live with that kind of ga'awa, with that kind of haughtiness, that kind of pride and believing in ourselves. We know that we're, as it says in the Torah, limtara shamayim ishteh, the Eretz Yisrael drinks from the rain of heaven. So we're in the hands of Hashem, and we know that. Any Jew lived in Eretz Yisrael in ancient times, and the fact is today also. Today we have desalination plants, so that's improved the situation. But even that doesn't really help you when you have a field of wheat in the Negev. You can't afford to irrigate that field with the water which you have to pay. If it falls from heaven, it's free. So even here we are aware of these things. We know, we feel it. Right. Oh, that's a good point. Here we have a shepherd, so that's a good point.
We were really waiting for that.
Right. How much do your sheep, your goats have to eat? Do they have all this natural? Right. The natural scrub and grass and plants they just appear when the rain happens. It just appears almost in a day or two. Right. There's something to eat for the sheep, for the goats. When it doesn't, then you have to find something else to give them, and it's more expensive and it's difficult. It's complicated. So, and our forefathers were, of course, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They're all shepherds, as we know, and shepherding was always a major part of the economy in Eretz Yisrael. So Eretz Yisrael is a different reality, completely different reality, and that's why we find in the Mishnah, Masechet Berachot, this is now source number 1. Actually, before, what we looked at till now was a kind of hakdama, introduction. Now we have the first source, which is the Mishnah, Masechet Berachot. The Mishnah, Masechet Berachot, at the end, the last chapter, says, Al hazikim wa ala ziwa'ot wa ala berakim wa ala ra'amim wa ala ruchot. In other words, strong winds and thunder and lightning, etc. You say, Baruch shekoho malei olam. When you see these beautiful vistas in Eretz Yisrael, you see the mountains from a distance, you have a great view, you see the hills, you see the sea, you see if you do see rivers, the deserts, you say Baruch Oseh Bereshith, because it's a very majestic, very powerful sight, and it should affect you. You should think to yourself, wow, look at that amazing Bria that Hashem placed before us. It goes on to say in the Mishnah, Al HaGeshamim Wala Besaroth HaTovoth Hu Omer Baruch HaTov HaMetoiv. When it rains, it doesn't say sometimes, it says Al HaGeshamim, when it rains, you say, and also when you hear good tidings, you say Baruch HaTov HaMetoiv. Wal Shmu'oth Ra'oth Hu Omer Baruch Dayan HaEmeth. That's the Mishnah. Now in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says as follows. This is source number 2. Why does the Mishnah mention together rain and Besaroth Tovot, good tidings? Rabbi Beracha b'shem Rabbi Lewi al shem maim karim al nefesh ayefa u'shmu'a tova me'eretz merhak. The pasuk compares in Mishlei. The pasuk compares cold water, cool water for someone who is thirsty and tired and weary is similar to a shmu'a tova, to a wonderful tiding that comes from a distant place. It revives you. How much does it have to rain for a person to have to say the Beracha HaTov HaMetiv? It's very simple. Baruch Atah Hashem, Ken HaMelech Olam HaTov HaMetiv. Very simple Beracha. Rabbi Hiya b'Shem Rabbi Yohanan says, B'tehila k'der revi'ah. At the beginning of the rainy season, in other words, after Sukkoth, k'der revi'ah, which means enough to soak the earth properly, which means a fairly good rainfall. So the seeds that were planted in the ground, shall we say the wheat seeds that were planted in the ground some weeks or a month before the end of Tishrei, the beginning of Mar Heshwan, is the time for planting the seeds. So they get enough water, enough moisture when there are, let's say, a couple of tfachim in the ground, 3 tfachim below the surface. They receive enough water which causes them to rot a bit and to sprout and to begin to grow. That's called the keder revi'ah. Uvesof but after that point, the rest of the season, even for just a small amount of rain, because once the seeds have begun to grow, have sprouted, now any rain is good. It's all helpful. It's all positive. So it says basof. In other words, after the beginning of the season, after the first major rainfall, the word karmid should remind you of a word that you know in English, perhaps, ceramic. It's talking about the roof tiles. Right? If the tiles in the roof look a bit wet, that's enough. You make the bracha. Doesn't take much. That's just a few minutes of rain. Rabbi Yosef b'shem Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Yonah Rabbi Yehuda b'shem Shmuel. Also, Batahila k'der revi'ah, l'vasof hafilu kol shu. It's actually the same statement. At the beginning, you need a little bit more rain to get things going, and after that, any rain is positive and welcome. This is all, of course, in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda bar Yehezkel Amar, he said as follows: my father, Abba, mevarech al yeridat geshamim. My father used to say the following tefillah of hodaya, of thanksgiving to Hashem when it rained. He would say, Yitgadel, Yitkadesh, Yitbarech, Yitromem, Shimecha Malkenu, Al Kol Tipa B'Tipa Shta Morid Lanu. Thank you, Hashem, for every drop that you give us. She'at man mi'an zo mizo, which means because you separate them. It doesn't come down as deluge, right? Water in huge quantities, as one body of water destroys. A flood washes everything away. So it comes down in a fashion, in a way, in a form which is productive and helpful and positive. Amar Rabbi Yudan, he causes it to rain in the right amount. If it rained too much, then that's also not good. La'asot l'ruach mishkal u'mayim tiken b'midah. It goes on to say, Rabbi Yosef bar Yaakov salak mevakara Rabbi Yudan Magdalaya. It says that one Chacham, Rabbi Yosef bar Yaakov, went to visit Rabbi Yudan in a place called Migdalaya or Magdalaya, which is probably has to do with the place that we refer to today as Migdal, on the western coast of the Kinnereth, right? Avdahu Taman, when he was there, it rained. Nahath mi Torah. V'shama kaleh, and he heard Rabbi Yehuda saying the following: Elef alafin uriber rivawan hayavim lehodot l'shimcha malkenu al kol tipa v'tipa shta morid lanu shota gomel tova l'hayavim. These are extra brachot of shevach, extra thanksgivings that these chachamim said on top of the bracha. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hatov v'ametiv. You haven't got a chair?
I have one.
Okay. Okay, so this is the Talmud Yerushalmi. We see in Eretz Yisrael, rain was a big deal. First of all, as the first rain, the first real downpour of the season, it has to soak the ground. Once it's soaked the ground well, you say the bracha, because that is the real benefit. Now the seeds they're in the ground waiting for that rain. They're going to start. Something's going to begin. Something's going to happen, and after that, all rain is good. On top of that, of course, people need to drink. Animals need to drink. Water was collected in cisterns, in boroth, in all kinds of in different ways. Again, because there's in certain places you can dig a well, in other places you really cannot. Depends on the part of the country, what the level of the water, the subterranean water tables, etc. So rain is essential for life in Eretz Yisrael, and something that everyone is aware of. And if there's no rain one season, what does that mean? That means before too long there's going to be famine. There's not going to be, or the price of grain in the marketplace will skyrocket. It will cost 2, 3, 4 times as much. Yes?
Just a technical question. The Rabbi Yehuda Bar-Yechezkel, is that Rabbi Yehuda Bar-Yechezkel, or is it a separate rabbi altogether?
I think it's the same.
The same one?
I think it's the same. Yes.
You would say the bracha if the rain comes before its time.
When
it comes early.
What's early? It doesn't rain in the middle of the summer. Not it doesn't.
Before, meaning before Sukkot.
No. Well, before Sukkot, I don't think you make the bracha. It's not that helpful. At least the usual agricultural cycles in the past were such that it wasn't considered that helpful. In fact, you still may have some of your produce out, the hay, etc., out in the field. It gets wet. Right. It's not actually good. You want it to dry, so it's actually not a good thing. So I think the answer is no. So, according to the Mishnah and according to the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's all very simple. It rains, hatov v'ametiv. And if you want to add these extra beautiful shvahim and hodaya, you do. You say modim anachnu lach. You say yitgadal yitkadash, whatever. Or you can say it in your own words. You can make up a little extra tefillah or hodaya, and you say the bracha. Very straightforward. In the Talmud Bavli, the matter is much more complicated. What do we say it says on the rain? Amar Rav Yehuda, who is from Bavel, Modim anachnu lach al kol tipa v'tiva shoharat torana, which is similar to what we saw before, but that's not a bracha. That's a thanksgiving, but that's not a bracha. Rabbi Yochanan mesayem ba. Apparently Rav Yehuda meant this is what you say before you say the bracha. Apparently that's what he said. Modim anachnu lach al kol tipa v'tipa, and then you say Baruch atah Hashem, well, either hatov v'ametiv or something else, as we're about to see. Rabbi Yochanan used to say at the end, so the Talmud Bavli is quoting Rabbi Yochanan, who was from Eretz Yisrael. He used to finish by saying Ilu finu maleh shirah chayam u'rushnenu rina. That's from Nishmat Kol Hai. Right? Nishmat Kol Hai is a very ancient, very beautiful and very ancient tefillah. And we see that at least parts of it are already mentioned here in the time of the Amoraim, and probably even goes back before that time, perhaps. And then it goes on to say, Baruch atah Hashem rov ha'odayoth v'ha'el ha'odayoth. So that's not the same bracha that the Mishnah stated. The Mishnah said Atov v'ametiv, And here you're talking about a different bracha. Rova Hodayoth, Hela Hodayoth, whatever that is. So the Gemara says, Vela Kasha, La Kasha, Hada Shamat Mishma, Hada Hazah Mihzeh. If you only heard that it rained, then you say this bracha. But if you saw that it rained, then you say the Hatov HaMitiv. That's what the Talmud states. Then the Gemara says, wait a moment. The Shama Mishma, if a person heard that it rained, but he didn't see it, let's say it rained in the province next door, or even just a couple of kilometers away. Hainu Besorot Tovot. That's a good tiding. That's the same as hearing Besorot Tovot. In which case, what do you say on Besorot Tovot? Hatov HaMitiv. Ela idi we idi the hazeh mahzeh. Wala kashya hada atha puratha hada atha tuva. So the Talmud here gives a different explanation, a second possible explanation. In both cases, it's talking about when you actually see the rainfall. But if it's a small amount, then you say the one bracha that was mentioned here, Rova Hodayoth, and if it's a more serious amount, then you say Hatov HaMitiv. So already the whole topic has become more complicated. There's now two possibilities. Then it goes on to say, and if you wish, I can actually explain it differently. Both cases are talking about when it rains enough, quite a lot. One is said when you yourself have a field which benefits from this rainfall, and the other is for a person who does not have his own field. So the Gemara says, do you mean to say that he who has a field says Hatov HaMitiv, like the Mishnah stated, and he who does not have a field says the other bracha? But that does not say in the Beracha, Bana Bayit Hadash, if you built a new home, V'kana Kelim Hadashim, and you bought new clothing or dishes, Omer Baruch Shehyanu V'gi'anu Lazaman Hazeh. The bracha that you make is Shehyanu. Shelo v'shel achirim omer Hatov HaMitiv. In other words, according to this Beracha, if something good happened to you and to other people, then you say Hatov HaMitiv, because it's good for you, Hatov to me, and HaMitiv to others. But if it's only you're alone, you have a field, you say Hatov HaMitiv, it's just you. So there's a certain contradiction. La kasha hada ithle shutafut hada lethe shutafut. No, it's talking about two possible cases. You may have a field in partnership with somebody else, so there are two people who benefit from this rainfall on this field, your field. Then you say Hatov HaMitiv, because it's you and somebody else. If it's only you, then you say the other bracha. Wahad Tanya does not state another Beracha, Kisaro shel davar al shelo hu omer baruch shehyanu al shelo wal shavero omer Hatov HaMitiv. So we have another Beracha which also supports this idea. So according to what do we have now? We have now a bracha Hatov HaMitiv. That's only if you have land which you yourself own in partnership with somebody else. If not, then you don't make that bracha, you make another bracha. So the whole matter becomes quite not so straightforward. This is, I think, one reason why this bracha has fallen by the wayside, because once you begin to make things too complicated and people sort of don't know what to do, and so they don't do anything. That's one reason. It's not the main reason, but it's also a reason. And Rambam actually quotes this based on the Talmud Bavli. It says, this is source number 4, Yoredu Geshamim, Im yesh lo sadeh mevarech shehyanu. If you have a field which you only own alone, then you say shehyanu. But it belongs to you and someone else, and if you don't have a field at all, which we didn't quote from the Gemara here, but this is also mentioned in the Talmud, if you have no field, what do? Then you say Ilu filo mareshi rakayam. He said the nusach from Nishmat Kol Hai Milefanim Misram Galtanu Valken Avil Mishpilachta Banu Baruch Neshamash Nefachta Ba'apenu, etc., etc. Baruch Ata Hashem Rova Hodayoth Ela Tishbachoth. So now we have three possibilities. If you have a field which belongs only to you, you say Shehyanu, and not what the Mishnah said Hatov HaMitiv. If the field belongs to you and to others to jointly own, then you say Hatov HaMitiv. And if you don't have a field, let's say you're a shoemaker, then and you live in town, you don't have a field, you're not a... We saw that in the Mishnah simply states Ala Geshamim Omer Baruch Hatov HaMitiv. When it rains, you make the Beracha Tov V'Mitiv. You can also add a few extra words of Hodaya, of thanks to Hashem, but that's what you say. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, no change. It just mentioned that you can add a few words, but the Beracha is the same Beracha mentioned in the Mishnah. In the Talmud Bavli, all of a sudden we find 3 Berachot. She'ahyanu, Hatov V'Mitiv, and also a Beracha, Rov Ha'odayoth V'El Ha'odayoth. In other words, there are 3 possibilities according to the Talmud Bavli. Either you don't have a field at all, in which, if you do not have a field at all, you do not make the Beracha Hatov V'Mitiv. There is another Beracha to make, which again, most people have never heard of, but it's right there, and we'll see in a moment, it's also in the Shulchan Aruch, which is Baruch Atah Hashem Rov Ha'odayoth El Ha'odayoth, it's something like that. There's a number of different nuschaot, but something like that. If you have a field which belongs only to you, then you say She'ahyanu. If you have a field which belongs to you and to others as well, then you say the Beracha that Mishnah prescribes, Hatov V'Mitiv.
According to the Bavli, that one would say She'ahyanu every time it rains?
No, only if you have a field which belongs only to you.
No, I'm saying if you have a field.
Every time it rains, yes, that's true. You would say that. But we have 3 brachot instead of 1. And a person has to begin thinking, well, do I fit into category 1 or 2 or 3? It's a bit more complicated. We should ask ourselves, why in the Talmud Bavli did something so straightforward, in the Mishnah and the Talmud Yerushalmi, why did it become something somewhat more complicated in the Talmud Bavli? I think there are 2 obvious reasons. First of all, in Bavel, not all the Jews, in other words, a smaller percentage of the Jews in Bavel actually were in agriculture or in shepherding than in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, most of the population were farmers or shepherds. There were those who were artisans, of course. You always have people living in towns and who make different articles and manufacture things. But even then, if that was the difference, if that was the only distinction between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, then you should ask yourself, why did it not say in the Talmud Yerushalmi, well, if you live in town and you don't have a field, then you don't say Hatov V'Mitiv, you say something else. You can say that. Apparently everyone says Hatov V'Mitiv. Whereas in Bavel, they did make this distinction. Number 1. Number 2, another difference between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael is that in Bavel, the rain is good, it's helpful, particularly for those who live off the land, who work the land. But it's not absolutely essential, because you could not rely on the rain in Bavel. There's not that much rain. There is rain, but not nearly as much as in Eretz Yisrael. It also begins at a different time of the year. It begins later, around the beginning of December. This is mentioned in the Talmud Bavli as also a different time when you begin asking for rain. In Tefillah, in Birkat HaShanim, you don't begin asking for rain within Talu Matar, according to the Nusach of Bavel, shall we say. You don't begin asking for rain in Bavel when you do in Eretz Yisrael, because the rainy season begins in Eretz Yisrael well before it does in Bavel. That's why in Chutz La'aretz, they're following the practice of Bavel, and they begin asking for rain only on the 4th or the 5th of December. Which is based on the weather pattern in Bavel. It doesn't make sense, actually, as the Rosh already writes, that in Provence or in Spain or in Germany you should be asking according to the weather patterns in Bavel, but that was the general practice that became the accepted minhag in all of Chutz La'aretz, because that was what was going on in Bavel, and then Bavel was the center of the Jewish world for some time, and whatever was done in Bavel, we all follow Bavel. That was the rule. But in Eretz Yisrael, that was never the rule. It was always, you begin asking for rain either when there's no mikdash, immediately on Motzei Shmini Aseret, the very end, immediately after Sukkot, Or, according to when there is a mikdash, then you wait till the beginning of Mar Heshwan. Rain in Eretz Yisrael is crucial. In Bavel, it's important, it's helpful, but it's not crucial. There's the rivers, you have the irrigation channels, you have the rivers, so you get by. Rain is always good, because then you won't have to wait for your day when you can take from the river, because you also had to pay, and there was a timetable, these people on this side of the river got their water from the channel on this day, and there was a person in charge of these things. If it rains, then it makes life easier, maybe also cheaper. So the importance of rain in Bavel was less than that in Eretz Yisrael. And that, I think, is why, that's one reason why in Bavel, those people who really felt the benefit of the rain for themselves and for others were only those who worked in agriculture, who had a field, and it was not only theirs, it belonged to them together with someone else. It was owned in partnership. They really felt the bracha. They really felt they were in a situation where they could say hatov v'ametiv to others as well, because you also see that in Bavel the focus, the perception of reality is more focused on reflexive on oneself. You look at your own reality. I have a field, but it only belongs to me. So I say shechianu. But I'm not looking at what happens to you. I'm looking at what happens to me. Because really we're all surviving anyhow. We're going to survive because we have the rivers, we have the parat, we have the hidekel. Rain is not such a big deal in Bavel, so we can manage. The only people who really feel the benefit of the rain for themselves and for others are those who have a field which belongs to them and to others. Those who have a field which is owned only by themselves, they don't really feel hatov v'ametiv. They don't feel this general communal national benefit. And if you don't have a field at all, well then, you should be saying something else. In Eretz Yisrael, the rain is not viewed as a subjective, personal benefit or matter. It is something which affects the entire nation, the entire country. The Jewish nation is zocheh to geshem. The Jewish nation receives rain. And if I myself don't have a field, that's fine, but the whole country needs rain for the cisterns to fill up the water cisterns we have to drink the rest of the year. It's not going to rain till next winter. So if we don't have rain now, what are you going to drink in the summer? So the benefit of the rain is always viewed as a national, general, collective benefit, not a personal issue. For these two reasons, I think in Bavel, rain was viewed differently. It was less crucial, and it was also dealt with on a more personal and individual manner, and less as viewed as a general benefit for the entire community. And we see that in other parts of the world later, when Jews moved to countries like Europe, where it rains essentially all the time, drought is not a common feature in European countries, then the whole concept of Birkat HaGeshamim falls by the wayside. And that's what we're about to see now. In number 5, in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Resh Kaf Aleph, Seif Aleph, Im Hayu Basar, Mehamat Asirat Geshamim. Note what it says. If there had been a drought or a lack of rain, and now there were basar, people were suffering, it was felt by the public, by the people, the Jews in this part of the world, because the Shulchan Aruch is writing for all manner of countries. So there was a lack of rain, and now it's rained. وَيَرَذُوا geshamim. Then مَبَرَخِيم عَلَيْهِمْ أَفَلْ پِي شَلَوْ يَرَذُوا عَذَيْن كَذَا رِوِيَا. Even though it has not rained very much, مِشِ يَرَذُوا كُلْ كَخْ شَرَبُوا عَلْ هَارِتْ شَعَلُوا أَبَابُعُوثْ مِنَ الْمَطَارِ. Once that it rains enough so the rain drops falling on the ground are hitting the puddles and causing the splashing, يَلْخُوا زَلِكْرَثْ زَيْ, then you make the bracha. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch begins this whole discussion only in a situation where there has been a lack of rain. It didn't say in the Mishnah, if there was a lack of rain, imayu basa'ar, and then it rained, then you make the bracha. No, in Eretz Yisrael, ala geshamim, you always make a bracha. I don't know if you're all familiar with the songs that Israeli children in kindergarten sing when it begins to the beginning of the rainy season, like now. They sing songs about Ma'ashiv haruach morid geshem ulai yired geshem achar b'tzoraim, all sorts of songs like that. And geshem ma'imim, there's all these songs that Israeli children learn in kindergarten having to do with rain. When it rains, they're happy. That's unusual. I never heard anyone happy. Where I grew up, when it rained, everyone said, "Oh, the weather's terrible. Oh, it's a disaster. Who wants to see rain again?" Rain was never a cause for rejoicing. In Eretz Yisrael, in a very natural, intuitive way, it's a real cause of rejoicing, and the children really understand this, and they're taught to understand this, and that's very reasonable. The Shulchan Aruch words the entire discussion to do with Birkat HaGeshamim in terms of if there was a lack of rain for some period of time and now it has rained, then you make this bracha, but normally you wouldn't make this bracha. And then the Rama adds, the Rama is living in Poland, and believe me, it rains plenty in Poland. The fact that we don't make this bracha at all, because in these countries where we live, there's always plenty of rain, and there's basically never any lack of rain, and that's true. And this is not something the Rama made up. This is already mentioned by the Bach in the name of the Smak. This is number 7. The Bach writes. The Bet Yosef also quotes this in number 6. In number 6, the Bet Yosef quotes this. He says, "Katav basmak." Smak is one of the Ashkenazi Rishonim, actually in France. The Birkat HaGeshem ena noheged ata. We don't make this bracha nowadays. V'lo natan ta'am lama. He didn't explain why. But the Bach explains. In number 7, he says, "U'ma she'enanu noagim bazman hazeh b'Birkat HaGeshamim." The reason we don't make this bracha nowadays, again, in Europe, we're talking about medieval times, or 500 years ago, 400 years ago. Mishum de lo nitkana bracha zo ela be'eretz Yisrael. This bracha was made specifically, the whole concept, the need, the relevance of this bracha is in Eretz Yisrael dafka. Shehem b'sa'ar mehamat hasirat geshamim, because they are always wondering whether they're going to have enough rain this year. Shehu tadir etzlam, it's always a problem. Usmehim tuva b'yiridatam, and therefore when it rains, they're very happy, they're very pleased, and very joyful. Sorichim levarech, therefore b'simcha, they have to make the bracha b'simcha, with great joy, al rov hatova, because of the great bracha. But in our countries, and the Bach lived in Ukraine, you don't have to ask the Ukrainians about whether they have too much or too little rain, or snow, or cold, etc. Ask them right now. We have plenty of rain, so it's not an issue. So if you have Jews living for centuries in such places, you understand why such a bracha simply falls by the wayside. It's totally forgotten. So much so that I actually checked years ago in the book which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, Yalkut Yosef, written by Rav Yitzchak Yosef, one of the sons of Rav Ovadia Yosef. And I was curious what he would write about Birkat HaGeshamim on Siman Resh Kaf Aleph. This is in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Resh Kaf Aleph. Here it is, Resh Kaf Aleph. I'm looking. Guess what? There is no Siman Resh Kaf Aleph. It's not there. I found that very both illuminating, but also very strange, because Mela in Chutz La'aretz, in different other generations and other times, you didn't find it necessary to write about this topic. Maybe I understand. But today in Eretz Yisrael, you wouldn't say, why you would not make this bracha, why you would not write about it, I do not know, but it's not there. There's nothing in Yalkut Yosef about Siman Resh Kaf Aleph, which talks about the Birkat HaGeshamim. But it's absolutely clear that in Eretz Yisrael, this is a very serious and important bracha, which we should say every time it rains, because rain here is always significant, always necessary, and always welcome. David here asked me previously, what happens when it rains too much? Because if it rains for several days, that shall we say, the earth is totally saturated with water, and then it just runs off. Maybe even washes away fields that have been planted. That's maybe even harmful. The Talmud does discuss this question, and it says, in Eretz Yisrael, no matter how much it rains, you always make the bracha. And David asked, what about a farmer just planted his field and now there's all this water and it's washing away his whole field, all the earth and the soil and the seeds? That may be true for you. But throughout the country it's raining, and throughout the country there are Jews who their cisterns are filling up with water, and their fields are going to become very green in a few days, and their sheep will have lots to eat. So maybe for you it wasn't such a wonderful thing right now, but you'll have to live with that because you're part of Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael needs this rain. In Eretz Yisrael, rain is always, there's always a bracha for rain. In Bavel, and also the stones are made of, the houses, are made of stone. It says in the Talmud, which is true. And stone houses don't wash away in the rain, they don't melt, they don't dissolve. In Bavel, they didn't have stones for building. So they made, what do they make their stone houses from? Mud bricks. We see this already in Parashat. Parashat Noah, right? It says they made levanim, they had hemar, they had clay, and all. They built with mud, with clay. If it rains and rains and rains non-stop for a long time, sometimes it begins to dissolve, it begins to fall apart, and the houses could even collapse. So sometimes it's really not a bracha. So if it rains too much in Bavel, you don't make a bracha. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's always a bracha. Because again, our perception, the way we look at these things is not, how is it for me right now? It's for all of Am Yisrael needs rain. Even if, in my case, it wasn't such a wonderful thing right now, okay, but you're making the bracha for everybody, for all of Am Yisrael. That's the bottom line. So, it seems clear to me that we should be making the bracha in Eretz Yisrael not according to the Bavli, which is the halacha is formulated by the Talmud Bavli, as we saw in as the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch also quotes, as we saw in the Rambam, where those three separate possibilities are mentioned, Shehayanu, Atov Ametiv, or the other bracha, Rovo Dayoth. That works and is appropriate and relevant for Bavel. And in other countries, the right thing to do is not to make a bracha bichlal. If you live in France and it's raining all the time, you live in Germany, you don't have droughts in Germany. I don't recall the last time there was a drought in Germany.
In the Russian Empire, the land ownership was forbidden to Jews with very small exception.
To own land.
In the Bill of Settlement, one of the things Jews were persecuted by, you're not allowed to own land.
Right.
Unless there were few exceptions.
And even if you did have land, there was never a shortage of rain. In fact, often the opposite. Often there's too much rain. Often there's flooding and the fields are overflowing and the rivers are rising and flooding everything. So in such countries, you don't make a bracha bichlal, as the Ramah writes. We don't make this bracha. In Eretz Yisrael, there is a bracha. It's always the same bracha. It's always Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam hatov v'hamitiv. If you add a few words before, Modim anachnu lach al kol tipa v'tipa, etc. That's even Nareza Meshubah.
Ayalon is flooding. Even when the Ayalon highway is flooding.
Even when the Ayalon is flooding, yes. And that's not Hashem's fault. That's the fault of the engineers who didn't design it properly, who didn't design the drainage properly.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.